Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to class today. Thank you for joining me. Whether you're watching live or you're watching the recording, I just appreciate you watching. This week we're continuing to talk about arrays in JavaScript, right? It's the second week of a 2-week module. And last week in our pre-recorded video, we covered a lot of material in terms of what arrays are and how arrays work. And this week I just kind of wanted to work with arrays just a little bit more. Talk about kind of what arrays are or really we've already talked about what arrays are. What am I saying? It's getting late in the day. Really just talk more about how we work with arrays just kind of on a site. You know, different things that we can do with that as far as all of that goes. Because when it comes to working with arrays and the way we work with arrays becomes very important when we're talking about how we work with objects in terms of our next module. So we'll see some new importance to the sorts of structures that we'll be using with arrays in the coming weeks as well. So I just want to do some code today. Just write a little bit of code. So that's the plan. We're going to get a new VS Code project going here. So let's get that going. Get into the Web 215 folder. We'll make a new directory for JavaScript arrays. We'll cd into that. And we will open code in there, code period. And we'll just start to do a little bit of work here. So what I would like to do, just kind of get started here, is we'll just start out with two files here. We'll start out with an index.html. And we will start out with a script.js. So in our index.html, we will put our HTML skeleton. We'll give it a title. And we'll go ahead and link to our JavaScript file, script src equals script.js. And we'll close that script tag. And in our script.js tag, we will start working with our JavaScript. And so what I'd like to do here is I'd like to work with an array. Right, and we can work with an array in different ways, right? Like, you know, one of the things that we've kind of seen previously, and we might do an example to this end, is we can kind of take data and push it in and pop it out of different arrays, right? I believe some of the stuff that we looked at last week involved the pushing and the popping and, you know, adding and removing data from arrays. Right, we looked at push and unshift and then pop and shift, I believe, if I recall a year ago correctly. Which, you know, a year is a long time. But in JavaScript, as we remember, we write an array just like we would write, you know, any other variable, right? We start with a variable syntax. So we can use var, we can use let, we can even use const, right? For a constant if we are going to have a standard set of pieces of data inside of our array. So in fact, let's start off with that. Let's use const here. And let's add let's start off fairly simple. Let's add 3 headings into this array. So let's just go heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3. Now, I've gotten a little bit ahead of myself here. I forgot to give this a name. So let's call this headings, right? One of the things that we said last time, right, is that typically when we are naming an array, we typically name it in the plural, right? So we put an S on the end of it, or just whatever to name it in the plural, right? So when we refer to it and we iterate over it later on, I might say something like for heading of headings, right? So that might be something that we do, right? So if I'm going to say, do something relatively simple with this, one of the things that I could do is I could write a simple for loop, and let's do this as a part of a function, just so we can kind of do this properly. So we'll do it as an arrow notation function. Why not? We'll write a create headings function, and we'll set that as an arrow notation function. And we'll use our for of loop that we learned about in our previous module when we started working with query selector all, because we said we use our for of loop with an iterable data structure like an array, because, you know, our query selector all returns to us an array of elements of a certain type. So I can write for var heading of headings, and from here, right, like I can just write some code to add these elements in. So document.query selector body .inner HTML plus equals, right? Remember, we would use plus equals here instead of just equals, because if we just used equals here, it would replace whatever's in that part of our HTML every single time, whereas if we use plus equals, it will add to the HTML every single time. And then we can add some code here. H1 plus the value of whatever heading is at that iteration, and slash H1. And so that will give me one heading for each of these heading items. Right, so we can save this. We can run a live server here. Actually, I shouldn't do that on body, so let's... Oh, and you know what we haven't done here as well? We need to actually call this function. So we've gotten a little bit ahead of ourselves here. So let's call our create headings function. Because, you know, just like in any other programming language, if we write a function, we have to subsequently call a function. So once we call our function, we can pull over our live site here, and we see we have heading 1, heading 2, and heading 3. And if we look in the page source of this, and we look in our HTML here, right? Remember that all this stuff here is just added by the live server there. It's just there so it can do live reloading. The HTML is here. There's no HTML here. It's all being handled by the JavaScript, which we just wrote. Right, so we get that heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. And whatever we would add to here, right? Like, let's say we wanted to throw an emoji on the inside of here. Like, let's say, it's November now, so let's try this turkey here. You know, we can throw that on there as well. Really simple, right? And so another way that we could write this, if we were to write this in a different way, is we could also write this as, you know, in a long form loop, right? Because, you know, one of the things that we discussed last time was the index locations of all of these items. So if I were to write another function, let's just write this in standard function notation instead of arrow notation. Function long form. Right, so this array here has a length, right? So we can say, okay, so headings.length is the length of our array. And if we look at our site here, and we can actually look at it in the console, we can console.log headings.length. And what we would see here is that we get 3. We get 3 back to us as the result from console.log headings.length. We see that right there. That's the length of our headings array. 1, 2, 3 elements. Now we know from what we did last week and from prior programming classes that when we're dealing with arrays start counting at 0, right? So when it comes to the index location or the home location for each item in this array, this is at index location 0, this is at index location 1, and this is at index location 2. So we can write another for loop that utilizes numerical values instead of writing a heading of headings here that's going to do basically the exact same thing. Right, and so we can write something that is for var I is 0. Right, so that's going to be our starting location. I being our iterator variable in this case, being our starting location. So we're going to start at the value 0. And we want to go up to a certain numerical value. In this case, the numerical value that we want to go up to is the length of our headings array. So we're going to start out with I as 0. And while I is less than headings.length, so while I is less than 3, in this case, but we would say headings.length, because if we were to go back and add headings to our array, then it would appropriately resize. Then we go ahead and step up the value of I plus plus. And add our curly braces in accordingly. So now in order to do this, just so we can make this a little bit simpler, because this would actually replace the value that's in body here, and I want it to attach to it, I'm just going to add a div inside of body here, just to make this a little bit simpler. And so now I can focus document.query selector div here. .inner HTML plus equals. And we can go with the same thing here. However, instead of our turkey here, I want to use a slightly different emoji just to show the difference there between what we have here on line 5 and here on line 11. So let's get rid of our turkey friend and let's add just another random emoji. Light bulb it is. But now in this instance, since we're not using our var heading of headings, this loop here has no idea what the term heading here means. Right? So we're actually looking at headings, our array, at the current index location of our iterator value. In this case, that being I. So if we save that, we can look at our site. All we need to do now is call our function. Call our function long form here. Save that. And we can have a look. And we can see these values. Now this does show us something interesting about the order of operations of plus equals, right? When it comes to, putting them into, and I could have, since I am using plus equals, I can do it without the div here, right? So I can get rid of that and use body because it still should just append it to the bottom. But that does show us something interesting about the order of operations that's going on here. Right? Because when I was appending the turkeys, they were appending below the div. Right? Because the div was already present in the DOM when the JavaScript was running. So the div existed. It added all the turkeys. And then it went back and it added the light bulbs into the div. So there is that, right? Like, and that gets us to a good place here when it comes to this idea of, well, what are we doing with this? Right? What can be done with this? Because now we can see that, well, we can access all of these items as a unit, right? Or we can access these items individually. Because as I'm working with these items here, I'm referencing them as part of a loop, right? But the call that I'm making to the item in headings is an individual call, right? Because it's not based on it being a part of headings as a whole, which is an interesting thing there. So from that, I can pull this data and I can do a lot of stuff with it. Right? I can take data that's in an array and I can put it into a conditional. I can take data that's in an array and I can put it in any sort of other structure that we've discussed this semester. And we're going to extend it even further as we examine the idea of objects next week. Right, so what are some things that I might do when I consider that? What are some things that I might do? Well, we can kind of think about it in relation to the project that we have that we're going to be working on, or that you should be working on this week. With arrays. The Ham King. The Ham King. So when we think about the Ham King lab that you have this week, this kind of takes and it pulls in many of the different things that we've done kind of throughout the semester. Right? Because it requires you to look at things in a bit of a different way. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to examine that or examine the idea of that lab in conjunction and just kind of do like a smaller version of it, basically. Just so we can kind of see it kind of work here. Right? That's at the end of the day, that's kind of what I want to do here. That's my goal. And there are different ways that it can be done. But I just want to kind of go through one of them. Right, we're going to use our heading 1, our heading 2, and our heading 3 as an example here. So I'm going to let's get rid of long form. And you know what? Let's get rid of create headings too. And in order to get us kind of started here, I'm going to take us all the way back to module 5. I'm going to take us all the way back to module 5. And we're going to start out by just kind of creating some different elements. So I want to be able to go through and create a box for each of our headings here. So on my output page, I want to have a box with heading 1, with heading 2, with heading 3. I'm also going to go ahead and add a style.css here. And in order to, and with my style.css here, one of the things that I want to do with this is I'm just going to use this to kind of prove some things that I'm doing here. Although it's going to be a little bit difficult with what we've named these things here. So I'm going to change up the names a little bit. Let's call them apple, orange, and pear. And that way in our CSS we can have a dot apple that we can give a border of 3 pixels, solid and red. We can have a dot orange that we can give a border of 3 pixels, solid and orange. And we can have a dot pair that we can give a border of 3 pixels, solid, and yellow-green. All right, and while we're thinking about it, let's go ahead and link our CSS file in here. So that'll be link rel equals style sheet href equals style.css type equals text/css. So we'll save that. That's saved. Now let's write ourselves a function that's going to iterate over these headings. What I'd like to do is I'd like to create a box. So we'll create a section box. And let's go ahead and kind of draw on the screen here. I'd like to create a section box. So we'll use section tags. In each of these section tags, we'll give them a class that is whatever value that we have in the array. Then we will put some sort of heading. Inside of here. And maybe even a little paragraph. You know, maybe like a hello world type of paragraph in here. Right, so let's create a build boxes function. So let's do it as an arrow notation. Const build boxes equals arrow notation, and let's zoom in so we all can see a little bit better. Arrow notation. So I'm going to build my loop here, right, in a similar way that I did previously. So we're going to just use our for of enhanced for loop here. So for var heading of headings document.body. Actually, document.body.innerHTML should work. So let's just go ahead and run with that. I think I might be trying to jQuery. We'll find out shortly enough. Plus equals. And we can just start writing some code here, right? So it's going to be section class equals, and in singular quotes, we are going to concatenate that with the name of heading, double quote, single quote. Right, and so this is one place where it does get a little bit kind of confusing, so you do want to kind of pay attention. Right, remember that I will always use the single quotes inside of my double quotes. That way I don't have to worry about escaping quotes. That's one thing that I do a lot, right? That way everything stays stringified inside of my double quotes. H1. Concatenate that with, again, heading. Backslash H1. P. Price goes here, right? And in our next module, when we talk about objects, right, this is where we'd add in, you know, kind of the idea of price. Because we'd have the ability to kind of have a data structure that can contain multiple elements. But for the time being, our data structure only has one item per home there. And then we can close our section tag. And so what we've effectively done here is we've basically just built a little template, right? That's going to go through, create a little section for each of these elements. And if we look at our live site here, we haven't called our function yet. So we need to call our function. I keep forgetting to call my function today. That just lets you know it's okay. I do it too sometimes. So let's call that function. And there we can see all the classes are working too, right? Because we can see that the box here is a red border. The box here is an orange border. The box here is a green border. And we can affect that even better. We can see that even better if we, went into our CSS and, played with our section code just a little bit. Maybe made it, 20%, 1-to-1. Right, just added a little bit more code to it, right? Just a really quick proof of concept that we can use here. But we see our example here. If we used our to uppercase method, right here, so if we put .to uppercase right there, that would actually give us I think it's because it is oh yeah. I need my parentheses there because that is a function. And I think I want that to be to title case. To title case? Because to uppercase makes it all uppercase. I could also just do text transform capitalize, which would probably be the smarter thing to do. Just do it with CSS. Since I didn't have that part in my notes anyway. Section H1 text transform capitalize. That's better. And so we have a way of going through and checking to see if we have a way of getting ahead of myself. We have a way of going through and making an item for each of these elements, right? And we can control it evenly. Once we add in our objects and once we're doing different things here, then we can work with it. So we've just created a list of items that's going to create things. And as long as I'm able to do things, it's going to, as long as I add more things here, it's going to add more stuff. Right? And this one's a little bit odd in terms of how I chose to do it, right? Because to show the difference between apple, orange, and pear, just to show that it's actually working with the class name and all that stuff, I gave it the different class names here. Right, so in the real world, I might not actually do that because that means I would have to add a different class name for every special item that I wanted to add to the list. The big deal that I'm getting out of this is that I've templated this. Right? I've templated this. So maybe for everything else, we could do border 3px solid gray. Right? And since class is more specific than element, these should still be colored. Right? We can take advantage of our specificity rules there. But if I add another element to our list here, like say grapes, then that's going to automatically just add a new box to my page. Right? And so that's the big deal that we're getting out of here, right? Is that we've templated this so we don't have to do nearly as much work for what we're doing, right? We can just add items to our array now if we want to add more items to our page. Watermelon, peach, whatever. And it's going to build another box on our page accordingly. Which is, that's the power. And so that's the one big part. And ideally you'd do this, like you're going to do this and make it look good as a part of the site as well, right? Like this looks kind of ugly here just because we're not really getting into the weeds with the CSS. But the other big thing that we want to do here is we want to be able to say, if it's not on sale, we don't want it to show up on the sale page. So let's make up a list of on sale. So we'll create a const and we'll call it on sale. And we'll set that equal to, right now we'll just put 3 items on here. We'll put apple on here. We'll put pear on here. And we'll put grapes on here. Now, from this, there are a few different ways that you can do this. Right? One of the ways that I might want to do this is by adding a class. Right, so let's, in our CSS, let's create a .hide class. And in that .hide class, we will add a display none. There. And let's, in our function that we've already written here, inside of our loop, let's add a conditional. And again, there are many different ways that we can do this. So we can write an if and let's, you know what, let's do some testing in console log first. Right, so we can save this. And let's do some testing in console log, because I want to use one of the functions that is in the other array methods video that you are presented in your module, just to do something that's just a little bit different here. So I want to see what happens. So let us inspect element. And let's see what happens if we console.log headings. Or no, I want to find it in on sale. So on sale dot find item. An item is just a variable name here. And we'll say item equals orange. So just something that is not in the list. And it returns apple to us, which seems kind of weird. What if we do find index instead of find? What does that return to us? That returns to us a 0. And actually, and so you might think that find is what we want to use here just because it's called find. And it's close. What I actually want to use here is includes. So what I actually want to do is I want to say on sale includes. On sale dot includes orange. And that should return to me either a true or a false. And so I can take advantage of that false, and I can use a not to be able to work with this. So I can say if not, and in this case that's an exclamation point, on sale dot includes heading, which is basically saying, okay, if on sale is not, if this heading is not included, I can just add a class to this element. Right, we've already created the element. So I can just add a class to this element. So document dot query selector period plus heading dot class list dot add hide. And so now we see all I have here is apple, pear, and grapes. Because all the rest of them have had the .hide class, which is display none, added to them. So I know I can use the .includes to see if on sale includes these elements. Right, I could also do it the other way around. Right, because I could also just go ahead and start out with it having hide in there by default, which might be a smarter way to, just so you're not, and then just removing it. Removing the class of hide if it's not in there, right? So then we could add something like watermelon into there. Right now we have watermelon into there. Right, just flip around that little logic flag there. Just so we can see something like that in action. So basically all we would really need to do there is just kind of do that, more or less, right? That's kind of a microcosm of what we're looking to do. In your site. And in the next module, we would extend that by adding JSON objects and working with it from here. So really super simple, right? Like we have one function here, and again, the big deal that's coming out of this, right, is that I can add. I've basically went through and I've templated this, and I'm actually going to go through and I'm going to flip that flag back to where I'm adding it on the not, so it's going to return. So it's going to add hide if it's false, instead of removing hide if it's true. But I mean, that's the basics of it. We've kind of templated it. If we took this and we built that into a nicely designed site, that's more or less, that's the basics of what you'd need to be able to complete the lab for the current module and get ready to proceed with the next one with jQuery, or JSON, I should say. And again, there are many different ways that this could be done, right? This is just one example. So if you want to try a different way, or you have a better understanding of it working a different way, I welcome you all to give that a try. But I think this is all that I have for you for this week. So with that being said, I will give you all these files with the output, or with the recording for today. So that is all that I have for you for today. We're approaching our hour anyway. We will hang out in the chat for just a couple minutes, just in case anybody who's here with me live has any questions. If you are watching the recording and you have any questions, please send me an email or a Teams message and let me know. But again, that's all that I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.